The first gunshot came as Grace Harlow clutched her 3-month-old daughter to her chest, trying desperately to shield the infant from the late April rain. The second shot split the air just as the stagecoach driver toppled from his seat, crimson blooming across his chest. Colorado Territory, 1875, was no place for a widow with nothing to her name but a baby and the clothes on her back. "Everybody out," a masked man shouted, aiming his revolver through the coach window. "Valuables in the bag and nobody gets hurt." Grace trembled as she stepped down from the coach, careful not to slip in the mud. Her baby, Emma, began to wail, her tiny face scrunched in distress. The other passengers, a traveling salesman and an elderly couple, stood in a frightened huddle as the bandits rifled through their belongings. "Nothing," one of the robbers growled, dumping the contents of Grace's carpetbag onto the muddy ground. Her spare dress, a hairbrush, and baby Emma's few cloth diapers sank into the muck. "You got nothing worth taking, please," Grace whispered. "I have nothing." "I'm traveling to my brother's in Whispering Pines." The bandit's eyes narrowed beneath his mask. "Then you best start walking, ain't our problem." They took the horses, leaving the passengers stranded on the trail with a dead driver and a broken-down stagecoach. The elderly couple and the salesman began the trek back to the last town they'd passed through, 15 miles behind them. "You coming, madam?" the salesman asked, offering his arm. Grace shook her head. "Whispering Pines is only 5 miles ahead. My brother is expecting me." It was only half a lie. Her brother had written months ago, inviting her to come live with him after her husband's death. But his last letter had been vague, mentioning a business opportunity that required travel. As the others disappeared down the trail, Grace gathered what remained of her belongings and began walking toward Whispering Pines, Emma bundled against her chest. The rain had stopped, but the April chill cut through her thin coat. Each step seemed heavier than the last. By dusk, the lights of Whispering Pines appeared in the distance, a small cluster of buildings nestled in the shadow of the Rocky Mountains. Grace's feet were blistered, her arms aching from carrying Emma. She stumbled into the town's single dusty street just as the lamps were being lit. "Excuse me," she asked a passing woman. "Could you direct me to Thomas Blackwood's property?" The woman's face fell. "Oh, honey, you're looking for Tom Blackwood." Grace nodded, a knot forming in her stomach. "Tom sold his claim 3 months ago. Left town with some fellows talking about silver in Nevada." The world seemed to tilt beneath Grace's feet. "But I'm his sister. He invited me to come stay." "I'm sorry, dear. Far as I know, he didn't leave word for anyone." Emma began to cry again, and Grace bounced her gently, fighting back her own tears. "Is there somewhere I might stay tonight? I have no money, but I can work. The boarding house is full up with minors," the woman said, "but you might try the church. Reverend Hayes sometimes takes in those in need." The church was dark when Grace arrived, its doors locked. A small sign indicated services were held only on Sundays, and the reverend visited from the next town over once a week. Today was Tuesday. Desperation clawed at Grace's throat as she stood in the growing darkness, her baby fussing with hunger. She had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. Her husband Jacob had left her with nothing after the fever took him 4 months ago. His gambling debts had claimed their small farm in Missouri, and her parents had passed years before. Grace sank onto the church steps, finally allowing her tears to fall. Emma's cries grew more insistent. "You look like you could use some help." Grace startled at the deep voice. A tall man stood before her, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. In the dim light, she could make out broad shoulders and a dust-covered duster coat. "I'm fine, thank you," she said automatically, wiping her tears with her sleeve. "No offense, madam, but you don't look fine." He stepped closer and Grace tensed. "Name's Colton Reed. I own a ranch about 3 miles outside of town." Grace held Emma tighter. "Grace Harlow, and my daughter, Emma." "Mrs. Harlow," he acknowledged with a tip of his hat. "Couldn't help but overhear your conversation with Mrs. Peterson back there. You're looking for Tom Blackwood." "He's my brother. I was to stay with him, but it seems he's gone." Colton Reed nodded slowly. "Tom sold his claim to me before heading west." He hesitated, seeming to weigh something in his mind. "Look, I've got a proposition for you." My sister was keeping house for me until she married a month ago. Place is falling apart without her. I need someone to cook and keep things in order. Grace straightened her spine. Are you offering me employment, Mr. Reed? Room and board for you and your little one, plus a small wage. There's a cabin on the property where my sister stayed. It's yours if you want it. It could be a trap, Grace thought. This man could be anyone, but Emma was hungry and night was falling and she had nowhere else to go. I accept, she said, rising to her feet. When do we start? Now seems as good a time as any. He reached for her carpet bag, which had barely survived the robbery. My wagon's down at the general store. As they walked, Grace studied Colton Reed from the corner of her eye. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30 to her 23 years. His face, now visible in the light from the town's windows, was tanned and weathered, with lines at the corners of his eyes suggesting he smiled more than he frowned. He moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to hard work. Your husband, he asked suddenly. Is he dead? Grace said flatly. 4 months ago, fever. Colton nodded, saying nothing more as they reached his wagon. He helped her up onto the seat with careful hands, then wrapped a worn but clean blanket around her and Emma. It's a short ride, he said, climbing up beside her and taking the reins. But the night air has a bite to it. The wagon lurched forward, leaving the small town behind. As they traveled, Emma finally quieted, soothed by the gentle rocking motion. She's hungry, Grace explained, embarrassment coloring her voice. I haven't been able to feed her properly today. There's a cow at the ranch that just calved, Colton said, keeping his eyes on the trail ahead. You can have all the milk you need. My cook, Santiago, will have supper waiting. Grace hadn't realized how hungry she was until the mention of food made her stomach growl audibly. Colton pretended not to notice. True to his word, the journey was short. The Reed Ranch came into view after a bend in the road, a sprawling property with a main house, a large barn, several outbuildings, and fenced pastures where cattle shapes moved in the moonlight. The main house was bigger than Grace had expected, a solid 2-story structure with a wide porch. Light shone from the windows and smoke curled from the chimney. As they pulled up, a man emerged from the house, wiping his hands on an apron. Santiago, Colton called, hopping down from the wagon. We have company. This is Mrs. Harlow and her daughter. They'll be staying in Maggie's cabin. The man, Santiago, raised an eyebrow but nodded. Supper's ready. I'll set another place. Colton helped Grace down, his hands strong and steady around her waist. Santiago's been with me since I started this place 5 years ago, best cook in the territory, and he knows it. Santiago scoffed, but there was affection in the sound. The cabin needs airing out. No one's been in there since Miss Maggie left. We'll eat first, Colton decided. Then I'll show Mrs. Harlow to the cabin. The interior of the house was surprisingly well appointed. A large stone fireplace dominated the main room, with comfortable-looking furniture arranged around it. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with leather-bound volumes. The dining room held a large oak table that could seat at least 8, though only 3 places were set. You have a lovely home, Mr. Reed, Grace said, genuinely impressed. Colton, he corrected. And thank you, it was just a small cabin when I started, built it up bit by bit. Santiago brought out a feast: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and green beans. Grace ate ravenously, pausing only to care for Emma, who had begun to fuss again. May I? She hesitated. Is there somewhere private I might feed her? Of course, Colton said quickly. Use my study. He led her to a small room off the main area, furnished with a desk and comfortable chair. Take your time. I'll have Santiago bring you some milk for the baby afterward. Left alone, Grace settled into the chair and nursed Emma, who latched on hungrily. As she fed her daughter, Grace studied the room around her. The desk was neatly organized, with ledgers and correspondence stacked in orderly piles. A framed photograph showed a younger Colton with a petite woman who must have been his sister, Maggie. When Emma had finished, Grace returned to the dining room to find Colton alone, Santiago having retired to his quarters behind the kitchen. I've had your things taken to the cabin, Colton said, rising from his chair. It's not much, but it's clean and dry. Thank you, Grace said. For all of this, I don't know what we would have done otherwise. Something like discomfort crossed Colton's face. No thanks needed. I need a housekeeper, you need a place to stay, simple business arrangement. The cabin was a short walk from the main house, a snug one-room structure with a small porch. Inside, a bed, table, 2 chairs, and a small stove provided the essentials. A curtained-off area in one corner held a washstand. Someone had lit the stove, and the cabin was pleasantly warm. "There's a cradle," Grace said, spotting it in the corner. "For Emma." "It was my sister's," Colton explained. "Her son's outgrown it." Grace ran her fingers over the smooth wood. "It's perfect, thank you." Colton shifted his weight, suddenly awkward. "I'll leave you to settle in. Breakfast is at sunup. After that, we can discuss your duties." After he left, Grace laid Emma in the cradle and unpacked her meager belongings. The robbery had left her with precious little 2 dresses besides the one she wore, undergarments, a hairbrush missing half its bristles, and Emma's few baby clothes. But they had shelter, food, and a chance to start over. Grace fell asleep that night to the sound of the wind in the pines and her daughter's peaceful breathing. Wondering what tomorrow would bring at the Reed Ranch, morning came early, announced by a rooster's crow and the distant lowing of cattle. Grace woke with a moment of disorientation before remembering where she was. Emma slept peacefully in her cradle, tiny fists curled beside her face. Grace washed quickly in the cold water from the pitcher, then dressed in her cleanest dress, a faded blue calico that had seen better days. She pinned her long brown hair into a simple bun, then lifted Emma, who had begun to stir. "Good morning, my love," she whispered, pressing a kiss to the baby's downy head. Ready to start our new life, the main house was already bustling with activity when Grace arrived. Santiago moved efficiently around the kitchen, frying bacon and mixing biscuit dough. Colton sat at the table, a cup of coffee in one hand and a ledger in the other. "Morning," he said, glancing up. In the daylight, Grace could see his features more clearly: strong jaw, straight nose, eyes the color of the sky just before sunset. His dark hair curled slightly at the collar of his shirt. "Good morning," she replied, suddenly conscious of her worn dress and simple appearance. "Coffee?" Santiago offered, gesturing to the pot on the stove. "Yes, please." Grace accepted the cup gratefully, balancing Emma in her other arm. "Here, let me," Colton said, rising from his chair. Before Grace could protest, he had gently taken Emma from her arms. The baby regarded him with solemn eyes. "Hello there, little lady," he said softly. To Grace's surprise, Emma's face broke into a toothless smile. "She likes you," Grace said, watching as her normally shy daughter reached for Colton's beard. "Babies and horses," Santiago commented, sliding plates of food onto the table. "They always know good people." Colton returned Emma to Grace's arms, a flush rising on his tan cheeks. "Eat," he instructed. "Then we'll talk about your duties here." Breakfast was a quiet affair, broken only by Santiago's occasional comments about the ranch and the coming day's work. After they'd eaten, Colton led Grace to his study. "So," he began, settling behind his desk. "As I mentioned, I need someone to keep house, cooking, cleaning, laundry. Santiago handles most of the meals, but he's got enough to do without worrying about the rest. Think you can manage?" "Of course," Grace nodded. "I kept house for my husband and helped run our farm. I'm not afraid of hard work." "Good. Your wages will be $5 a week plus room and board for you and the baby. The cabin is yours as long as you're employed here." $5 a week was generous, more than many men earned for hard physical labor. Grace couldn't help her surprise. "Is something wrong?" Colton asked, noting her expression. "No, it's just that's very generous," he shrugged. "Fair pay for fair work. I can't abide cheating anyone, especially someone working for me." Grace studied him, trying to reconcile this generous employer with the gruff man who'd picked her up from the church steps. "May I ask how many people work on the ranch?" "Besides you and Santiago, there's 4 cowhands: Miguel, Jasper, Bill, and Pete. They've got a bunkhouse out back. During roundup or branding, I hire on extra help." "And your sister? She used to do this job." A fond smile crossed Colton's face. "Maggie came out here with me when I first bought the place. Stubborn as they come, wouldn't let me start this adventure alone, but she met a shopkeeper in town last year, fell head over heels, got married a month ago. You must miss her." Every day, but she's happy and that's what matters. He cleared his throat as if embarrassed by the sentiment. Any other questions? Just one, Grace said. What happened to Tom Blackwood, my brother? You said you bought his claim. Colton's expression shifted, becoming guarded. Not much to tell, he had a small spread bordering mine. Needed money quick for some venture out west. I was looking to expand, so we made a deal. Something about his tone suggested there was more to the story, but Grace didn't press. She had her own secrets, after all. Well, she said, rising from her chair with Emma in her arms. I should get to work. Santiago will show you around, Colton said, already turning his attention back to his ledgers. If you need anything, just ask. The next few days fell into a rhythm. Grace woke at dawn to feed Emma, then walked to the main house to help Santiago with breakfast. After the men ate, she spent the morning cleaning sweeping floors, dusting furniture, polishing the few silver pieces Colton owned. In the afternoons, she did laundry or mended clothes. Emma stayed with her, content to watch from her blanket on the floor or when fussy, tied to Grace's back in a sling. The Cowboys treated her with polite deference, tipping their hats when they saw her and making sure to wipe their boots before entering the house. Santiago became an unexpected ally, watching Emma when Grace needed both hands free and sharing stories of his homeland in Mexico. Colton remained something of a mystery. He rose before dawn and often returned after dark, spending his days checking fences, moving cattle, and overseeing the day-to-day operations of the ranch. When their paths crossed, he was unfailingly polite but distant, as if maintaining a careful barrier between them. It was on her 5th day at the ranch that Grace discovered the source of his reserve. She had been cleaning the bookshelves in the main room when a leather-bound volume caught her eye, Pride and Prejudice, by Jane Austen. Her mother had read it to her as a girl, and Grace couldn't resist opening it. Inside the cover, written in a delicate feminine hand, was an inscription, "To my beloved Colton, may you find your Elizabeth. All my love, Caroline, my wife's." Grace startled at Colton's voice behind her. She hadn't heard him enter. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, returning the book to the shelf. "I shouldn't have, it's all right," he said, though his voice was tight. She loved books. Always said a house without them wasn't a home. Grace hesitated, then asked softly, "How long has she been gone?" 3 years this July. Colton moved to the window, looking out at the mountains in the distance. "Childbirth fever, the baby too." "I'm so sorry," Grace whispered, understanding now his initial awkwardness around Emma. "Life goes on," he said, still not looking at her. "It has to." Before Grace could respond, Emma began to cry from her blanket on the floor. Grace moved to pick her up, but Colton reached her first. "I've got her," he said, lifting the baby with surprising gentleness. "You finish what you were doing." Grace watched as Colton walked Emma around the room, speaking to her in low tones she couldn't quite make out. Emma's cries subsided, replaced by curious coos as she reached for Colton's bandana. Something shifted in Grace's chest, a warm feeling she hadn't experienced since Jacob's death. She pushed it away firmly. Colton Reed was her employer, a widower still mourning his wife, and she was a penniless widow with a baby and secrets she couldn't afford to share. The next morning brought a change to the routine. Grace arrived at the main house to find Colton saddling a horse in the yard, dressed for riding. "I need to check the north pasture," he said when he saw her. "Thought you and Emma might like to come along, get to see more of the ranch." Grace hesitated. "I have laundry to do and the upstairs needs sweeping. It can wait," Colton said. "Santiago packed us some food. We'll make a day of it." There was something different about him today, a lightness that hadn't been there before. Grace found herself nodding before she could think better of it. "I'll need to get Emma's blanket from the cabin. Already in the saddlebags," he said, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Along with a jar of milk for her." 20 minutes later, Grace found herself seated on a gentle mare named Daisy, Emma secured in a sling across her chest. Colton rode beside them on his stallion, keeping their pace slow and steady. The ranch was larger than Grace had realized, stretching from the valley where the house stood up into the foothills of the mountains. They rode through meadows dotted with wildflowers, alongside a creek that bubbled over smooth stones, and through stands of aspen trees whose leaves shimmered in the morning light. "It's beautiful," Grace said as they paused atop a small rise. Below them, cattle grazed peacefully in a verdant pasture. "This is my favorite spot on the whole ranch," Colton admitted. "You can see everything from here, the house, the barn, all the way to town on a clear day." "How did you come to own all this?" Grace asked, "if you don't mind my asking." Colton dismounted, then helped Grace down from her horse. "My father was a rancher in Texas, taught me everything I know. After the war I fought for the Union. I came west looking for a fresh start. Worked as a foreman on a few ranches, saved every penny. When this land came up for sale, I took a chance." "It was brave of you," Grace said. "Starting over in a new place." A shadow crossed his face. "Not brave, necessary. Texas held too many memories after my parents died." They spread a blanket on the grass, and Colton unpacked the food Santiago had prepared: cold chicken, bread, cheese, and apple tarts. Emma slept peacefully in the sling as they ate. "What about you?" Colton asked. "Your brother Tom mentioned you were married to a farmer in Missouri." Grace tensed. "Yes, Jacob had a small farm, nothing like this." She gestured to the sprawling ranch around them. "And he died of fever, you said?" "Yes, 4 months ago." Colton seemed to sense her reluctance to discuss it further and changed the subject. "Your little one there, she's a good baby." "Hardly ever cries." Grace smiled down at Emma. "She's my saving grace. After Jacob died, she was all I had left." "She has your eyes," Colton observed. "Same shade of green." The observation surprised Grace. Few men noticed such details. "Thank you, I think she has Jacob's chin, though." "Stubborn like him?" They fell into companionable silence, watching clouds drift across the Colorado sky. Emma woke but remained content, staring up at the leaves overhead with wide, curious eyes. "I've been thinking," Colton said suddenly. "The cabin you're in, it needs work. The roof leaks when it rains hard and the stove doesn't draw properly. I'd like to fix it up for you, make it more comfortable." "That's not necessary," Grace protested. "It's perfectly adequate. For summer maybe, but winter comes hard in these mountains. You and the baby need something sturdier." His tone brooked no argument. "I'll start on it next week." "Thank you," Grace said, touched by his consideration. "That's very kind." Colton looked embarrassed. "It's practical is all. Can't have my housekeeper freezing to death come December." But there was something in his eyes that belied the casual words, a warmth that made Grace's heart beat a little faster. They rode back to the ranch as the afternoon waned, the mountains casting long shadows across the valley. By the time they reached the house, Emma was fussing, ready for her evening feeding. "Thank you for today," Grace said as Colton helped her dismount. "It was lovely to see more of the ranch." "My pleasure," he replied, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Perhaps we could do it again sometime." Grace nodded, unable to find her voice as she looked up into his blue eyes. For a moment, something electric passed between them, a connection that transcended employer and employee. Then Santiago called from the porch, breaking the spell. "Supper's ready." "And there's a letter come for Mrs. Harlow." Grace froze. "A letter for me? Who would know I'm here?" Colton's brow furrowed. "Let's find out." The letter was addressed in a familiar hand that made Grace's blood run cold. Thomas Blackwood, her brother, had written to her care of the Reed Ranch. With trembling fingers, Grace opened the envelope and read the brief message inside. "G heard you were looking for me in WP. Sorry I missed you. Coming back through in July. Need to discuss family business. Stay put. T bad news?" Colton asked, watching her face. Grace folded the letter quickly. "No, just my brother letting me know he'll be passing through in July. That's good, isn't it? You'll get to see him." "Yes," Grace said, forcing a smile. "Very good." But as she walked back to her cabin that evening, Emma sleeping against her shoulder, Grace felt a weight settle over her. Her brother's return meant complications she'd hoped to avoid. Thomas knew things about Jacob, things that could destroy the fragile peace she'd found at the Reed Ranch. For the first time, Grace allowed herself to admit how much she wanted to stay. Not just for the security the job provided, but for the way Colton looked at her when he thought she wouldn't notice. For the kindness he showed to Emma. For the feeling of belonging she'd begun to experience. But July was coming, and with it, a reckoning she couldn't escape. May turned to June, and life on the Reed Ranch settled into a comfortable rhythm. True to his word, Colton began work on improving the cabin, adding a small bedroom for Emma and reinforcing the roof against the mountain storms that occasionally swept through the valley. Grace found herself looking forward to their interactions, Colton stopping by the cabin in the evenings to check on the day's progress, their hands brushing as she handed him coffee in the mornings, the way his eyes crinkled when Emma did something particularly charming. One evening in mid-June, Grace sat on the porch of the cabin, mending one of Colton's shirts while Emma slept inside. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. A figure on horseback appeared on the path from the main house. Colton, returning from a day checking fence lines. "Evening," he called, dismounting and tying his horse to the porch rail. "Mind if I join you?" "Not at all," Grace said, setting aside her mending. "There's coffee on the stove if you'd like some." "Sounds perfect." When he returned with 2 steaming cups, Colton settled into the chair beside hers, stretching his long legs out before him. "Roof's holding up well," he commented, nodding toward the cabin. "That storm last night was a good test." "It didn't leak a drop," Grace confirmed. Though Emma slept through the whole thing, thunder and all, Colton smiled. "She's a brave one like her mother." Grace looked down at her coffee. "I'm not brave, just doing what needs to be done." "That's what bravery is," he said simply. "Doing what needs doing, even when you're scared." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "My wife loved evenings like this," Colton said suddenly. Caroline would sit out on the porch of the main house and name all the constellations. She knew them all. Her father was a teacher back east. Grace glanced at him, surprised by the mention of his wife. Colton rarely spoke of Caroline. "She sounds like a remarkable woman." She was. His voice was soft with memory. "We were childhood sweethearts back in Texas, married young, came out west together to start fresh after the war. She believed in this place even when I had doubts." "I'm sorry you lost her," Grace said gently. "For a long time I thought I'd lost everything," Colton admitted. "Maggie kept me going those first months, and then slowly I started living again instead of just existing." He turned to look at Grace, his eyes serious in the gathering darkness. "Until recently, I didn't think I'd ever feel anything again, anything good, that is." Grace's heart hammered in her chest at the implication in his words. "Colton, you don't have to say anything," he interrupted. "I just wanted you to know that having you and Emma here. It's brought something back to this place, something I thought was gone for good." Before Grace could respond, Emma's cry sounded from inside the cabin. She rose quickly, grateful for the interruption. "I should, of course," Colton said, standing as well. "It's getting late anyway." "I'll see you in the morning." But as she turned to go inside, he caught her hand. "Grace, I meant what I said." His fingers were warm around hers, calloused from years of ranch work but gentle all the same. Grace allowed herself one moment of weakness, squeezing his hand before withdrawing her own. "Good night, Colton." Inside the cabin, as she rocked Emma back to sleep, Grace's mind whirled with conflicting emotions. In the 2 months since arriving at the Reed Ranch, she'd come to care for Colton more than she'd thought possible. His kindness, his quiet strength, the way he treated Emma as if she were precious, all of it had slipped past the defenses she'd built around her heart after Jacob's death. But July was approaching, and with it, Thomas's return. Her brother knew the truth about Jacob's death, a truth that would change how Colton saw her forever. Grace closed her eyes, holding Emma close. For tonight, at least, she could pretend that the future held possibilities instead of peril. The following week brought unexpected visitors to the Reed Ranch. Grace was hanging laundry in the yard when she heard the sound of approaching horses. 3 riders appeared on the road from town, 2 men and a woman, all well-dressed and riding fine horses. Colton emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. "Mayor Collins," he called, recognizing the lead rider. "This is an unexpected pleasure." The portly man at the front of the group dismounted with some difficulty. "Reed, good to see you. Hope we're not intruding." "Not at all," Colton said, though Grace noted the tension in his shoulders. "What brings you out this way?" "Social call," Mayor Collins said jovially. And to introduce my niece, Miss Deanna Prescott, just arrived from Boston. Deanna, this is Colton Reed, owner of one of the finest ranches in the territory. The young woman dismounted gracefully, offering a gloved hand to Colton. She was strikingly beautiful, with golden hair arranged fashionably beneath her riding hat and a figure showcased by an expensive riding habit. "A pleasure, Mr. Reed," she said in a cultured voice. "Uncle has told me so much about you." "Miss Prescott," Colton acknowledged with a polite nod. "Welcome to Colorado." The third rider, a younger man with a carefully waxed mustache, dismounted as well. "And of course you remember my son, Frederick," the mayor added. "Of course," Colton replied, shaking the young man's hand. "How's the law practice?" "Thriving," Frederick Collins answered, "though I find myself increasingly drawn to politics. Following in father's footsteps, you might say." Throughout this exchange, Grace continued hanging laundry, trying to make herself invisible. But Deanna Prescott's sharp eyes found her nonetheless. "And who is this?" she asked, her tone suggesting she already knew the answer and found it wanting. Colton turned, seeming to remember Grace's presence. "Mrs. Grace Harlow, my housekeeper." "Mrs. Harlow, Mayor Collins, his son Frederick, and Miss Prescott." Grace nodded politely, acutely aware of her work dress and wind-tousled hair compared to Deanna's impeccable appearance. "A widow, I understand," Mayor Collins said, his eyes calculating. "With a child?" "Yes, sir," Grace answered, straightening her spine. "My daughter is napping in the cabin." An awkward silence fell, broken by Colton's invitation. "Won't you all come inside? Santiago can prepare some refreshments." As the group moved toward the house, Deanna Prescott linked her arm through Colton's, looking up at him with undisguised interest. "I'd love to hear more about your ranch, Mr. Reed. Uncle says you're quite the success story." Grace returned to her laundry, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in her stomach. It was obvious why the Collins family had brought Deanna Prescott to the Reed Ranch. The beautiful, wealthy niece would make a perfect match for the successful rancher. Later that evening, after the visitors had departed, Grace was putting Emma to bed when a knock sounded at the cabin door. She opened it to find Colton standing there, his expression unreadable. "May I come in?" Grace stepped aside to let him enter, suddenly conscious of the cabin's modest furnishings. "I wanted to apologize for the mayor's behavior today," Colton said without preamble. "The way he spoke to you was inappropriate." "It's all right," Grace said, moving to check on Emma in her cradle. "I'm just the housekeeper, after all." "No," Colton said sharply. "You're not just anything, Grace." The intensity in his voice made her turn to face him. "Mayor Collins has been trying to find me a wife for 2 years," Colton continued, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "First it was his wife's cousin, then the banker's daughter from Denver, now this niece from Boston, as if I can't manage my own affairs." "Miss Prescott is very beautiful," Grace said carefully. "And completely wrong for ranch life," Colton replied. "Did you see those riding clothes? Probably cost more than a month's wages for all my hands combined." Despite herself, Grace smiled. "She did seem rather delicate." "She asked me if the wild Indians ever attacked the ranch," Colton said with a roll of his eyes. Then proceeded to tell me how she could civilize the place with proper furnishings from back east. "And what did you tell her?" "That my Ute neighbors have been nothing but peaceful, and that I like my furnishings just fine as they are." He moved closer to Grace, his expression softening. "I like my life just fine as it is too, better than fine." Recently, Grace's heart fluttered, but caution held her back. "Colton, you shouldn't say such things to me. I'm your employee." "Is that all you are?" he asked quietly. Before Grace could answer, Emma stirred in her cradle, whimpering softly. Grace moved to pick her up, grateful for the interruption. "It's getting late," she said, not meeting Colton's eyes. "Emma needs her feeding." Colton nodded, accepting the dismissal. "We're riding out early tomorrow to move the herd to the south pasture. I'll be gone most of the day." "Be careful," Grace said automatically. At the door, Colton paused. "Grace, I meant what I said the other night, and nothing Mayor Collins or his niece can say or do will change that." After he left, Grace sat in the rocking chair with Emma at her breast, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. In another life, a life where she hadn't made terrible choices, where the truth about Jacob's death wasn't hanging over her head. Perhaps she could have returned Colton's feelings openly. But July was coming, and with it, a reckoning she couldn't escape. The morning of July 1st dawned clear and hot, the sun already burning away the dew when Grace walked to the main house with Emma in her arms. Santiago was preparing breakfast, humming a Spanish melody as he worked. "Buenos dias, señora," he greeted her, "and good morning to you too, little one." Emma gurgled in response, reaching for Santiago's colorful bandana. At 6 months old, she was becoming more active by the day, her personality emerging in gummy smiles and inquisitive glances. "Where is everyone?" Grace asked, noticing the unusual quiet. Normally, the cowhands would be gathered around the table, drinking coffee and discussing the day's work. "Colton took the men to town," Santiago explained. "Supply wagon broke an axle yesterday. They've gone to fetch the new one and some other supplies we need." "All of them?" Grace asked, surprised that Colton would leave the ranch unattended. "The wagon is heavy and they need many hands. They will be back by supper." Santiago gave her a knowing look. "Colton said to tell you he will bring something special for Emma from the store." Grace smiled despite herself. Colton was always bringing little gifts for Emma: a wooden rattle, a soft blanket, a tiny pair of moccasins made by a Ute woman who sometimes traded at the ranch. Each gift was presented casually, as if it were of no consequence, but the care with which he selected them spoke volumes. "I'll clean the upstairs bedrooms today," Grace decided, "while it's quiet." She spent the morning working, Emma napping on a blanket nearby when she wasn't being carried in her sling. By midday, the bedrooms were spotless, the wooden floors gleaming and fresh linens on all the beds. Grace was in the kitchen helping Santiago prepare lunch when hoofbeats sounded in the yard. "They're back early," Santiago said, moving to the window. His expression changed suddenly, alarm replacing curiosity. "It's not Colton." Grace joined him at the window. A single rider had pulled up outside, a man with dark hair and a familiar set to his shoulders that made her blood run cold. "Thomas," she whispered. Her brother dismounted, tying his horse to the hitching post before striding toward the house. He looked much as Grace remembered, tall and lean, with their father's sharp features and calculating eyes. But there was a hardness to him now that hadn't been there before, a tension in the way he carried himself. "Stay inside," Grace told Santiago. "Please." Before the cook could protest, she stepped out onto the porch, closing the door firmly behind her. "Thomas," she said again, her voice steadier than she felt. Her brother's face broke into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "There you are, little sister. Heard in town you'd found yourself a nice situation out here. What are you doing here, Thomas?" Grace asked, descending the steps to meet him in the yard. "Your letter said July. It's only the 1st. Thomas shrugged. "Plans change. Thought I'd come early, see how you're faring." His eyes flicked to the sling where Emma slept, and my little niece, of course. Grace resisted the urge to back away. "We're doing well. Mr. Reed has been very kind." "So I hear," Thomas said, his tone insinuating. "Very kind indeed to a pretty widow with a baby." "It's not like that," Grace said quickly. "I'm his housekeeper, nothing more." Thomas laughed, a harsh sound that made Emma stir. "Sure, Gracie, just his housekeeper." He sobered suddenly. "We need to talk privately." "About what?" "About Jacob, about what really happened that night." Grace felt the blood drain from her face. "There's nothing to talk about." "Jacob died of fever." "That's not what his brother thinks," Thomas said, lowering his voice. "Malcolm Harlow's been asking questions, offering rewards for information." "Malcolm is in St. Louis," Grace protested. "He hasn't seen Jacob in years." "He's in Denver now," Thomas countered. "And working his way through every town between there and Missouri, looking for his brother's killer." Grace clutched Emma tighter. "I didn't kill Jacob." "No, the way I heard it, you shot him dead when he came at you drunk. Self-defense, maybe, but still murder in the eyes of the law." Thomas stepped closer. "Especially when you buried him in the field and told everyone he died of fever." "It wasn't like that," Grace whispered, tears burning her eyes. "You don't know what he was like at the end, what he did." "I don't care what he did," Thomas interrupted. "What I care about is that Malcolm Harlow is offering $500 for information leading to your arrest. And that's a lot of money, sister dear." Understanding dawned, cold and clear. You want me to pay you to keep quiet? Thomas smiled, a predator's smile. Smart girl. Always were the clever one in the family. I don't have any money, Grace said. Everything I earn goes to caring for Emma. But your employer does, Thomas pointed out. Colton Reed is one of the wealthiest ranchers in the territory, and he seems mighty fond of you and the baby. Horror filled Grace at the implication. I won't ask Colton for money. Then I suggest you find another way to get it, Thomas said, his voice hardening. $500 by the end of the week, or I go to the sheriff with what I know. The end of the week, Grace gasped. That's impossible. Figure it out, Gracie. Thomas mounted his horse, looking down at her with cold eyes. For Emma's sake, if not your own, wouldn't want her growing up knowing her mama killed her papa, would you? With that parting shot, he wheeled his horse around and rode away, leaving Grace standing in the yard, trembling with fear and rage. Inside the house, Santiago was waiting, concern etched on his weathered face. Senora, are you all right? Grace composed herself with effort. Yes. That was my brother. He brought news from home. Santiago's expression suggested he didn't believe her, but he didn't press. Bad news, I think. Yes, Grace admitted. Bad news indeed. For the rest of the day, Grace went through her chores mechanically, her mind racing. $500 might as well have been $5,000 for all the chance she had of raising it in a week. Her entire savings amounted to less than $50, carefully hidden in the lining of her carpet bag. She could run, take Emma and disappear before Thomas returned or Malcolm Harlow arrived. But where would they go? How would they survive? The truth about Jacob's death was both simpler and more complicated than Thomas had implied. After years of enduring her husband's drunken rages, Grace had indeed shot him, but only after he'd threatened to kill Emma, claiming the baby wasn't his. In the struggle for the gun, it had gone off, the bullet striking Jacob in the chest. Terrified and alone, Grace had buried him in the field behind their small farm and told neighbors he'd succumbed to the fever that had been making its way through the county. No one had questioned her story. Jacob had few friends and many enemies. But if the truth came out now, if Malcolm Harlow succeeded in having her arrested, what would happen to Emma? The thought of her daughter in an orphanage, or worse, raised by Jacob's vindictive brother, was unbearable. By the time Colton and the ranch hands returned that evening, Grace had made her decision. She would leave, taking Emma and the little money she had, and try to reach California or Oregon where no one knew her. It would mean abandoning the safety and security of the Reed Ranch and Colton, but she saw no alternative. Colton found her in the kitchen, helping Santiago with supper. There she is, he said warmly, his face lighting up at the sight of her. And where's my favorite little lady? In her basket, Grace said, nodding toward the corner where Emma played with the wooden rattle Colton had given her. She's been waiting for you. Colton crossed to Emma, scooping her up with practiced ease. I brought you something, Miss Emma, he said, pulling a small stuffed horse from his pocket. Made by Mrs. White in town, soft enough for little hands. Emma grabbed for the toy, gurgling happily. Watching them, Grace felt her heart breaking. In another life, in another world where her past didn't threaten to destroy her future, this could have been her family. Grace, Colton's voice broke into her thoughts. Is everything all right? You look pale. Just tired, she lied. It was a long day. Colton studied her face, concern in his blue eyes. Santiago mentioned your brother stopped by. Is that what's troubling you? Grace hesitated. For one wild moment, she considered telling Colton everything about Jacob, about Thomas's blackmail, about her fear. But the moment passed. Colton was a good man, an honorable man. How could she ask him to harbor a woman who had killed her husband, no matter the circumstances? Thomas is passing through, she said instead. Just wanted to say hello. I'm sorry I missed him, Colton said. I'd like to meet your family. He'll be back, Grace said, the words tasting bitter in her mouth. That night, after Emma was asleep, Grace packed their few belongings into her carpet bag. She wrote a brief note to Colton, thanking him for his kindness and apologizing for leaving without proper notice. She couldn't bring herself to write the words goodbye or farewell. Instead, she signed simply, with gratitude, Grace. She would leave before dawn, walking to town where she could catch the morning stage. With luck, she'd be miles away before Thomas returned or Colton discovered her absence. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. Grace woke in the dark to the smell of smoke and the sound of Emma coughing. Sitting bolt upright, she saw flames licking at the cabin wall near the stove, orange light casting grotesque shadows across the room. "Emma," she cried, lunging for the cradle. Scooping up her daughter, Grace grabbed her shawl and wrapped it around them both, shielding Emma's face from the thickening smoke. The fire had spread rapidly, blocking the door. Grace turned to the window, but it was stuck, the frame swollen from recent rains. She pounded on the glass with her fist, crying out for help, but the cabin was too far from the main house for anyone to hear. The smoke was getting thicker, making it hard to breathe. Grace dropped to the floor, crawling toward the door with Emma clutched to her chest. The heat was intense, the flames now consuming the roof above them. "Please, God," Grace prayed, coughing, "not like this, not Emma." As if in answer to her prayer, the door burst open, a dark figure silhouetted against the flames. "Grace, Colton," she cried, struggling toward his voice. Strong arms lifted her and Emma, carrying them out into the cool night air. Grace gasped, filling her lungs as Colton set them down safely away from the burning cabin. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his face streaked with soot, eyes wild with fear. "No," Grace managed between coughs. "We're all right. How did you know?" "Santiago saw the flames from his window," Colton explained, checking Emma for injuries. "The baby was crying but appeared unharmed. Thank God I got to you in time." By now, the ranch hands had arrived, forming a bucket line from the well to the cabin. But it was too late. The small structure was fully engulfed, the roof collapsing with a shower of sparks. "My things," Grace said numbly, watching as everything she owned turned to ash. "The carpetbag things can be replaced," Colton said firmly. "You and Emma can't." He looked down at her, his expression fierce in the firelight. "I thought I'd lost you." The raw emotion in his voice brought fresh tears to Grace's eyes. Before she could finish, Santiago appeared at their side, his face grim. "Señor, come look at this." Colton followed the cook to the back of the burning cabin where the fire had not yet reached. There, stuck into the wood with a hunting knife, was a piece of paper. "What is it?" Grace asked, coming up behind them with Emma in her arms. Colton pulled the knife free, taking the paper and holding it up to read by the light of the flames. His expression darkened as he scanned the crude message. "What does it say?" Grace pressed, fear knotting her stomach. "Next time it won't be just the cabin," Colton Reed, his voice tight with anger. "It's signed M.H. Malcolm Harlow," Grace whispered, her worst fears confirmed. Jacob's brother had found her. Colton turned to her sharply. "You know who did this?" Grace nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "Get to the house," Colton ordered, his tone brooking no argument. "Santiago, take Mrs. Harlow and Emma inside. Keep them safe. Jasper, Bill, get your rifles. We're going to search the property." "Colton, no," Grace protested. "He's dangerous." "So am I when someone threatens my family," Colton replied, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that left no doubt about his meaning. "Go with Santiago. We'll talk when I get back." As she followed Santiago to the main house, Emma clutched tightly against her. Grace felt a curious mixture of terror and hope. Colton had called them his family. But once he knew the truth about Jacob's death, would he still feel the same? Inside the house, Santiago settled Grace and Emma in the parlor, bringing blankets and hot tea. Emma, exhausted from the ordeal, fell asleep in Grace's arms. "You should rest too, Señora," Santiago advised gently. "I will keep watch," but Grace couldn't sleep. Her mind raced with fear and confusion. How had Malcolm found her? Had Thomas betrayed her already, unwilling to wait for money she couldn't provide? And what would she tell Colton when he returned? Dawn was breaking when the search party returned, empty-handed but for tracks leading away from the ranch toward the mountains. "Whoever it was, they're long gone," Colton reported, sinking wearily into a chair opposite Grace. His face was smudged with soot, his clothes smoke-stained. "But we'll find them." "Colton," Grace began, her throat tight. "There's something I need to tell you." He held up a hand. "First, let me say something." His eyes, tired but determined, met hers. I found the note you left in your carpetbag. It survived the fire, mostly. Grace's heart sank. Colton, I can explain you were leaving, he said simply. Without saying goodbye. Why? The directness of the question left no room for evasion. To protect you, Grace whispered, from the consequences of my past. Malcolm Harlow, Colton stated. Who is he to you? My husband's brother. Grace drew a deep breath, knowing the moment of truth had arrived. Jacob didn't die of fever, Colton. He died because I shot him. The words hung in the air between them. Colton's expression remained carefully neutral, but Grace could see the shock in his eyes. Tell me what happened, he said finally. All of it. And so, with Emma sleeping peacefully in her arms, Grace told Colton everything: Jacob's gradual descent into alcoholism and violence after their farm began to fail, the beatings she had endured, his accusations that Emma wasn't his child, and finally, the terrible night when he had threatened to kill the baby. He was drunk, more so than usual, Grace said, her voice hollow with remembered fear. He said he was going to get rid of the bastard. Those were his words. He had a gun. We struggled for it, and it went off. She closed her eyes, seeing again the look of surprise on Jacob's face as he fell. I didn't mean to kill him. I just wanted to protect Emma. So you buried him and told everyone he died of fever, Colton finished. Grace nodded. Who would have believed me? A woman with no family nearby, no witnesses. They would have hanged me and put Emma in an orphanage. And now his brother is looking for revenge. Yes, Thomas, my brother, he came yesterday to warn me. Malcolm is offering $500 for information leading to my arrest. Thomas wanted me to pay him to keep quiet. Understanding dawned on Colton's face. That's why you were leaving. To protect Emma and me. I couldn't involve you in this, Grace said, tears spilling down her cheeks. You've been so good to us, Colton. I couldn't bear it if something happened to you because of me. Colton was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, to Grace's astonishment, he knelt before her chair, taking her free hand in both of his. Grace Harlow, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Nothing you've told me changes how I feel about you or Emma. You did what any mother would do to protect her child. There's no sin in that. But Malcolm Harlow is a coward who sets fires in the night, Colton said firmly. And he's made a serious mistake threatening what's mine. Yours, Grace whispered, hardly daring to hope. If you'll have me, Colton said, his blue eyes steady on hers. Grace, I've been half in love with you since the moment I found you on those church steps. These past months watching you with Emma, seeing your strength and your kindness, I've fallen the rest of the way. But the scandal, I don't give a damn about scandal, Colton interrupted. This is the West. People come here for second chances to start over. That's what I did after Caroline died. It's what you were trying to do for Emma. He took a deep breath as if gathering his courage. I want you to stay, Grace, not as my housekeeper, but as my wife. I want to be a father to Emma, to give her my name and my protection. And I want to spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to run again. Grace could scarcely believe what she was hearing. Colton, are you certain? Once people know, let them talk, he said dismissively. All that matters is that I love you, Grace. I love Emma. And I'll fight anyone who tries to take you from me, including Malcolm Harlow. Emma stirred in Grace's arms, opening her eyes to look solemnly at Colton. To Grace's amazement, her daughter reached out a tiny hand toward him, as if giving her blessing. What do you say, Grace? Colton asked softly. Will you marry me? Will you let me protect you and Emma? In that moment, looking into Colton's earnest face, Grace allowed herself to believe in second chances, in new beginnings, in love that could overcome the past. Yes, she whispered, her heart full. Yes, Colton Reed, I will marry you. His smile was like the sun breaking through clouds as he leaned forward to kiss her, their first kiss, gentle and sweet and full of promise. But the shadow of Malcolm Harlow still loomed, a threat to their newfound happiness. What about Malcolm? Grace asked when they parted. And Thomas? They won't simply disappear. No, they won't, Colton agreed, his expression hardening. But neither will I. First thing tomorrow, we're going to town to see Judge Wilson. We'll tell him everything, get his advice. Then we're getting married as soon as possible. Tomorrow, Grace gasped. But no buts, Colton said firmly. The sooner you're Mrs. Reed, the better. No one will question Emma being my daughter then, and Malcolm Harlow will find it a lot harder to press charges against the wife of the most prosperous rancher in the county. Grace had to admit the plan made sense. What about tonight? The cabin, you and Emma will stay in the main house, Colton decided. My room is the largest. You take the bed, I'll sleep in the chair. Colton, I can't put you out of your own bed, he grinned. Just until tomorrow, Mrs. Almost Reed. After that, we'll share it proper. The blush that rose to Grace's cheeks made him laugh, a deep, joyous sound that seemed to chase away the last shadows of fear from her heart. True to his word, Colton rode with Grace and Emma to town the next morning. Judge Wilson, a grave older man with kind eyes, listened to their story without interruption. A complicated situation, he said when they had finished, but not without precedent. Self-defense is recognized by the law, Mrs. Harlow. But I concealed Jacob's death, Grace pointed out. Buried him secretly, out of fear for yourself and your child, the judge nodded. Understandable given the circumstances. Had you come forward immediately, I believe a fair judge would have recognized the truth. And now, Colton asked. Malcolm Harlow is offering money for information against Grace. Vigilante justice, Judge Wilson frowned. Against the law itself. I'll send a telegram to the authorities in Denver where you say Malcolm was last seen. As for your brother, Mrs. Harlow, attempted blackmail is a serious offense. I don't want Thomas arrested, Grace said quickly. He's troubled since the war, the judge's expression softened. I understand family loyalty, Mrs. Harlow, but consider this. Your brother may pose a continued threat to you and your daughter. We'll deal with Thomas if he returns, Colton said, placing a supportive hand on Grace's shoulder. For now, our priority is protecting Grace and Emma from Malcolm Harlow. The best protection I can offer is the legitimacy of marriage, Judge Wilson said. As it happens, I'm authorized to perform the ceremony, if you're both certain. We are, Colton and Grace answered in unison, and so, with Santiago and the storekeeper's wife as witnesses, Grace Harlow became Grace Reed in the judge's office that very afternoon. Emma, dressed in a new gown Colton had purchased from the general store, watched with solemn eyes as her mother and the man who was now her legal father exchanged vows. I now pronounce you husband and wife, Judge Wilson declared. May your union be blessed with happiness and peace. As Colton kissed his bride, a sense of rightness settled over Grace. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Malcolm Harlow, her brother Thomas, the whispers of those who might learn the truth about Jacob's death, they would face them together. They spent their wedding night at the hotel in town, Emma sleeping peacefully in a borrowed cradle while Grace and Colton consummated their marriage with tender passion. In Colton's arms, Grace found a gentleness she had never known with Jacob, a respect and care that brought tears to her eyes. I never thought I could be this happy again, Colton whispered as they lay together in the darkness. After Caroline died, I thought that part of my life was over. I felt the same, Grace admitted. With Jacob, even before the end, there was so little joy. And after, I was so focused on surviving, on keeping Emma safe, that I couldn't imagine ever loving again. And now, Colton asked, his fingers tracing the curve of her cheek. Now I can't imagine not loving you, Grace answered truthfully. You've given us so much, Colton, a home, safety, your name, but most of all, you've given us hope. They returned to the ranch the following day to find Santiago and the hands had prepared a surprise, the beginnings of a new cabin, larger and sturdier than the one that had burned, positioned closer to the main house. Until it's finished, you'll stay in the main house, Colton told Grace. Though I'm not sure we need the cabin at all now that you're my wife. I think we do, Grace said thoughtfully, not to live in, perhaps, but as a reminder. Of what? Colton asked, puzzled. Of how far we've come, Grace explained. From that day on the church steps when you found me with nothing but Emma and the clothes on my back to this, a family, a future. Colton smiled, understanding in his eyes. A testament to second chances, exactly. The days that followed were filled with a domestic happiness Grace had never thought to experience. She continued to keep house, but now as the mistress of the Reed Ranch rather than its housekeeper. Colton doted on Emma, teaching her to clap her hands and delighting in her first attempts at crawling. The ranch hands treated Grace with a new respect, tipping their hats and calling her Mrs. Reed with genuine warmth. It was Santiago who spotted the riders approaching one July afternoon, 3 men on horseback, dust rising behind them as they galloped toward the ranch. "Senor Colton," he called. Riders coming fast, Colton, who had been showing Emma the new foal in the barn, handed the baby to Grace. "Get inside," he ordered, his expression grim. "Lock the door." "Colton, now, Grace, please." Grace hurried to the house, her heart pounding. From the window, she watched as Colton and 2 of the hands, all armed, stood waiting as the riders approached. She recognized Thomas immediately, his lanky form slouched in the saddle. Beside him rode a man who could only be Malcolm Harlow, with the same heavy brows and square jaw as Jacob. The third man wore a badge that caught the sunlight. "That's far enough," she heard Colton call as the riders stopped several yards away. "State your business." "Looking for Grace Harlow," Malcolm Harlow shouted back. "Her brother says she's here." "There's no Grace Harlow on this property," Colton replied evenly. "My wife's name is Grace Reed." Malcolm's face contorted with rage. "She's a murdering whore who killed my brother." "Watch your mouth," Colton warned, his hand moving to the pistol at his hip. "That's my wife you're talking about." The man with the badge urged his horse forward. "I'm Deputy Marshal Fletcher from Denver. I'm investigating allegations regarding the death of Jacob Harlow." "Then you should know that Judge Wilson in town has all the details," Colton said calmly. "My wife acted in self-defense when her first husband threatened their child. The judge has telegraphed the federal marshal's office with the full story." "That true?" Deputy Fletcher asked, turning to Thomas. Thomas shifted uncomfortably. "She says it was self-defense, but she buried him secret-like, told everyone he died of fever." "Because she feared for her life and her child's," Colton countered. "As she had every right to, given that her brother-in-law there has been threatening her and offering money for information against her. He even burned down a cabin on my property, endangered my wife and daughter." "That's a lie." Malcolm sputtered. We found tracks, Deputy," one of the ranch hands spoke up, "leading from the burnt cabin into the mountains, and a note pinned with a knife signed M.H. Deputy Fletcher's expression hardened. "That true, Harlow?" "You set fire to a dwelling with a woman and child inside." "I just wanted to scare her," Malcolm muttered, not meeting the deputy's eyes. "Make her confess what she did to Jacob." "Attempted murder, destruction of property, vigilante action," the deputy listed grimly. "Serious charges, Mr. Harlow." "What about her?" Malcolm demanded, pointing toward the house where Grace stood watching. "She killed my brother." "That's for a court to decide," Deputy Fletcher said. "If there's evidence to support pressing charges, from what Judge Wilson telegraphed, it seems clear it was self-defense." "This is your doing," Malcolm spat at Thomas. "You said she'd be alone, vulnerable. You didn't say nothing about her marrying some rich rancher." Thomas looked away, shame crossing his features. "I didn't know, Malcolm, I swear it." Inside the house, Grace could stand it no longer. With Emma secure in her cradle, she stepped onto the porch. "Grace, stay back," Colton called, alarmed, but Grace walked steadily toward the group, stopping at Colton's side. "I'm here, Deputy Fletcher," she said clearly. "I won't hide from the truth any longer." The deputy studied her thoughtfully. "Mrs. Reed, your husband Jacob Harlow died last winter, correct?" "Yes," Grace confirmed. "During a struggle for a gun he was threatening to use on our daughter. The gun went off and Jacob was killed instantly. And you buried him secretly because—" "Because I was afraid," Grace said simply. "Afraid for myself, but mostly for Emma. Jacob had been violent for some time. I feared no one would believe me." Deputy Fletcher nodded slowly. "Judge Wilson seems convinced of your story, Mrs. Reed, and I'm inclined to agree. Self-defense isn't murder." "She's lying," Malcolm shouted. "Jacob would never hurt a child." "Jacob wasn't himself at the end," Thomas said quietly, surprising everyone. "The drinking changed him, made him mean." Malcolm turned on Thomas, his face purple with rage. "Whose side are you on?" "The truth," Thomas replied, straightening in his saddle. "I came out here to warn Grace about you, Malcolm. I never intended." He trailed off, looking at his sister with genuine regret. I'm sorry, Gracie, I was desperate, needed the money, but I never wanted this. You set fire to that cabin, Malcolm accused. You helped me. I showed you where she was staying, Thomas corrected. I didn't know you planned to burn it down. When I saw the flames, I tried to stop you. Deputy Fletcher had heard enough. Malcolm Harlow, I'm placing you under arrest for arson, attempted murder, and vigilante action. He drew his pistol. Dismount slowly and keep your hands where I can see them. For a moment, it seemed Malcolm might resist. His hand twitched toward his gun. But with 3 armed men facing him, he thought better of it, sliding sullenly from his horse. Thomas Blackwood, you're under arrest as an accessory, the deputy continued, though your testimony against Harlow will be taken into consideration. As the deputy secured the prisoners, Thomas looked at Grace one last time. I truly am sorry, sister. I hope someday you can forgive me. Grace couldn't speak past the lump in her throat, but she managed a small nod. Whatever Thomas had done, he was still her brother, the last of her blood family. I'll take them to town, Deputy Fletcher announced, mounting his horse. Judge Wilson can hold them until the federal marshal arrives. Mrs. Reed, you'll likely need to testify at some point. She'll be there, Colton assured him, his arm around Grace's waist, with her husband at her side. As they watched the deputy lead Malcolm and Thomas away, Grace leaned against Colton, suddenly exhausted. Is it really over? She whispered. The worst of it, Colton replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. Malcolm will face trial for the arson at the very least. And with Thomas's testimony and Judge Wilson's support, I doubt any charges will be brought against you for Jacob's death. And Thomas, that's harder to say, Colton admitted, but he did try to stop Malcolm, according to his own admission. That counts for something. Inside the house, Emma began to cry, her wails audible through the open window. Grace smiled despite the emotional turmoil of the day. Our daughter calls. Our daughter, Colton repeated, the words filling him with visible pride. Let's go to her. As autumn painted the mountains in golds and reds, life at the Reed Ranch settled into a new normal. True to Colton's prediction, the charges against Grace regarding Jacob's death were formally dismissed by the territorial court. Malcolm Harlow was sentenced to 10 years in prison for arson and attempted murder. Thomas, cooperating fully with the authorities, received a lesser sentence of 2 years, with the possibility of early release for good behavior. The new cabin was completed by September, a sturdy 2-room structure that Grace used as a schoolroom for Emma and the children of the ranch hands. At 24, with her dark past behind her, Grace found herself embracing a role she had never anticipated: teacher, mentor, and the respected wife of Colton Reed. Colton, for his part, thrived in his role as husband and father. He taught Emma to ride her first pony, built her a swing that hung from the old oak tree near the house, and read to her every night before bed. His love for Grace deepened with each passing day, his admiration for her strength and resilience never waning. On a crisp October evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in fiery hues, Colton took Grace's hand in his. Happy? He asked simply. Grace smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. More than I ever thought possible. Emma played nearby, arranging pebbles in careful patterns as she hummed to herself. At nearly 1 year old, she was growing into a curious, joyful child who bore no scars from the traumatic start to her life. I have news, Grace said softly. I wasn't sure, but Santiago's wife confirmed it today. Colton turned to look at her, his blue eyes questioning. News, Grace took his hand and placed it on her stomach, still flat but soon to change. We're going to have a baby, Colton, in the spring, his face transformed with wonder and joy. A baby, truly. Truly, Grace confirmed, laughing as he swept her into his arms, spinning her around on the porch while Emma clapped and giggled at the sight. Emma's going to have a brother or sister, Colton said, setting Grace down gently. Our family is growing. Our family, Grace echoed, the words still miraculous to her. From that desperate day on the church steps, penniless, with a baby in her arms and nowhere to turn to, this moment of perfect happiness seemed an impossible journey. Yet here she was, surrounded by love, secure in the knowledge that her past was truly behind her. Colton knelt to scoop Emma into his arms, bringing her over to join their embrace. "What do you think, little one? Ready to be a big sister?" Emma's response was a happy babble and a wet kiss on Colton's cheek that made both adults laugh. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Grace Reed offered a silent prayer of gratitude for second chances, for new beginnings, and for the man who had shared not just his land, but his name and his heart with a desperate widow and her child. In the spring of 1876, as Colorado prepared to join the Union as the 38th state, Grace gave birth to a healthy son they named James Thomas Reed James for Colton's father, and Thomas in hope that Grace's brother might one day find the same redemption she had. Emma, now an exuberant toddler of 18 months, approached her baby brother with solemn curiosity, then declared him pretty in one of her first complete sentences, much to her parents' amusement. The Reed Ranch prospered, expanding its operations as Colton's reputation for fair dealing and quality cattle spread throughout the territory. Grace, balancing motherhood with her role as the ranch's unofficial schoolteacher, found fulfillment in watching both her children and her students grow in knowledge and confidence. Thomas was released from prison after serving 18 months of his sentence, reformed and determined to make amends. He settled in a town 50 miles away, working as a carpenter and visiting his sister and her family on holidays and special occasions. The relationship remained fragile, but healing had begun. On the 5th anniversary of the day Colton had found Grace on the church steps, they hosted a celebration at the ranch, a gathering of friends, neighbors, and the extended family they had built around themselves. Santiago and his wife, the ranch hands and their families, even Judge Wilson and his wife made the journey to share in their happiness. As twilight fell, lanterns were lit around the yard, and Santiago's son played the guitar while couples danced on the packed earth. Grace, watching Emma twirl in her new dress while baby James slept in his cradle nearby, felt Colton's arms encircle her from behind. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Reed," he murmured against her ear. Grace leaned back into his embrace, savoring the strength and warmth of him. "I was thinking about journeys," she said, "about how sometimes the hardest roads lead to the most beautiful destinations." Colton turned her in his arms, looking down into her face with the same tenderness that had been there from the beginning. "Are we a beautiful destination, then?" "The most beautiful," Grace assured him, rising on tiptoe to kiss him softly. "And still becoming more so every day." As the music played and stars appeared overhead, Grace Reed held tight to the man who had given her not just shelter when she was desperate, but a life filled with love when she had thought such things forever beyond her reach. From penniless widow to beloved wife and mother, her journey had been one of courage and hope, a testament to the healing power of love and the promise of new beginnings in the wild western lands they called home.